I'm delighted to welcome Andrew McLachlan of WindRiver. And Andrew is going to give us a vendor's point of view of how the telco to techco destination has changed in his view. Welcome, Andrew.
Good
Before
morning,
we
Amy.
get going, maybe you could tell us a little bit, please, about the company and your role. And I believe I'm right in saying that you spent much of your working life on the operator side of things.
I have. Good morning. Hopefully you can hear and see me okay. Excellent. Um, yes, I have. I've spent most of my life as an operator from the early days of TeleWest, which of course transformed itself into
Wow.
a number of other companies,
Hmm.
to Level 3 Communications, BT, and a couple of others. But I have been on the vendor side too. So I've previously worked for Cisco, for Huawei, and a couple of startups, including a little AI startup recently as well. So I've dipped my toe into AI. But most recently, Red Hat and now WindRiver. So my role at WindRiver is to run the EMEA and Middle East solutions team. So we've got a great team of people stretched across these regions, looking at quite a lot of different disciplines actually. So in addition to telco, we cover a little bit of automotive, aviation, and a lot of embedded. So kind of back to my roots at some point with sort of old telco embedded, but in a very new way that we're doing for sort of cloud native apps and a little bit of analytics with it as well.
Okay, thank you for that. So maybe we can talk about cloud native architectures and their role as you see it in their how they've changed the telco to techco narrative. And I think you've got quite strong ideas on this.
I th- it's been an interesting journey, I think, for all of us in the industry, regardless of which side you sit on, be it service provider or vendor. I think a lot of all of these technologies, they're around, are they foundational? You know, can we build on them? Or are they just fads? And I think, cloud native has shown that it's very much now a foundational technology. It's been out for quite a long time, but it's moved around into different use cases. So a lot of this was previously, you know, high scale for web services and, I guess media companies as well. But we're seeing it now fully embedded in telco, predominantly driven, I think, by, RAN and data center requirements and upcoming GPU requirements as well. But I think it's become mature enough now where it's part of infrastructure, which is what everybody I think originally wanted, is that we can look at this more as a long-term architecture upon which we can bring new applications and new services to bear much easier than before, when it was either a truck roll exercise. It was, replace the box that had everything in it, the software, the service, the hardware. So we're in a very different position now in the industry in terms of how we can, add drop services and of course, change functionality.
So, I mean, it seems to me that maybe we've just arrived pretty recently with this, where we set off. It seems to me it's been a long journey, and I mean, are all containers as the service providers sort of created equal, or are they different? I mean, it seems to me they need to be kind of similar because you need a kind of horizontal platform if all this swapping in and out, as you've just described, as opposed to whole stack, is possible.
I think it's reasonably safe to say, we have coalesced around a framework, probably around CNCF as a sort of a guiding light for how that framework's supposed to operate. As you say, everybody does have their own flavour. I mean, there's different reasons for having different types of architectures. Hardware dependency, there is a little bit of that depending on the application you choose. Clearly, if you're in telco and you're in RAN, you're, previously been looking at smart NICs. Now we might look at GPUs. If you're in the video transcoding game, clearly got a different set of hardware requirements. But in general, I think we've moved. I think it's fair to say into more of a Kubernetes and containerized world. It's so ubiquitously deployed, and underneath it is the hypervisor technology. So I think that's where we do see probably most of the differentiation. Is we all have our own preferred hypervisor technology. They do come with different strengths and weaknesses, but ultimately, we're trying to hold up very similar platforms. We're trying to hold up a Kubernetes containerized infrastructure in general, I would say. Then there's the virtual machine infrastructure, so be it OpenStack or others. All of these things now can be run on top of these hypervisor platforms, and with good reliability, which is obviously what we need for telco.
Andrew, could I just ask you to adjust your camera slightly
I
because
can, yes.
losing half of your face behind your name tag.
Let's try.
That's better.
Is that better? I'll tell you what, I'll just lean back rather than playing with the camera. Yeah,
as
so how's
opposed
that?
to sort of this much.
Thank you.
It's a bit disconcerting.
Yeah, it auto-zoomed, so I'll turn that off.
Okay. So the idea now is that operators can change application vendors, they can upgrade quickly, they can add new services. And I was very struck when we were having a preparatory discussion for this today, is that you said you can also depreciate services very quickly and how important that is.
Yeah, it's been, I mean, other than regulated services, which do obviously have their own constraints, with government and, in the UK Ofcom regulations, but it has been historically quite difficult to get rid of services because they've been physical. So we either leave boxes lying around or, we're not quite sure how to transform or disconnect a service. But of course, in this case, they're just containers. So in some sense, they can just be deleted. But we can restore quite quickly. If people decide a service needs to come back into service, we can do that without the truck roll, as long as the service is, based predominantly in software. And I think, that is a bit of a game changer. Legacy has always been something that's very, very difficult to get away from, especially if it's physically instantiated. So we moved to a different paradigm with that now.
Okay, so I'm interested in the game changer. So, another thing you mentioned to me is that when you can take apps in and out and up and down and swap elements in and out of stacks, as opposed to you move one brick in the stack and the whole thing wobbles, it kind of really makes a difference. And that includes even something that's potentially frightening, given our experiences with 5G, the shift from 5G to 6G. Maybe we just need to think about it as a change of app as well as a bunch of new radios, I guess.
Yeah, and I think I like your description actually. Is that what we don't want to do is build a giant Jenga game where we're waiting for the final piece that takes us down.
Yes.
So and I think there's good discipline around that now. I mean, with CI/CD, the ability to really test the pipelines before we deploy. I think hopefully the Jenga exercise that we might have experienced at the beginning of cloud native is behind us. But I'm going to remember your analogy. Actually, I really like that one. Thank you. I've just written it down.
Okay, so when you're talking about that, do you think that this progress with cloudification and how we're using containerization and microservices, that we finally reached the point we set out to reach? And maybe we could say just a little bit actually about its impact on OSS, because I've always been interested in talking to the great Enrico Blanco, for example, or Scott Petty, or various people who've described OSS as like the toughest nut to crack in the digital transformation.
It is, and I think, to be fair, it's still a challenge. But I think maybe the challenge is in a slightly narrower space than it used to be. With the infrastructure now being able to be controlled in a more common manner, i.e., I'm just going to keep using Kubernetes and OpenStack for an example, but those have very well described or very well published APIs. So it is possible at this point to rotate your infrastructure and lifecycle manage it using a very common set of APIs across the vendors. And compliance with that is something that's sought in RFPs. So people look for common standards, and in telco we look for things like O2 interfaces. And we've seen really good progress again in the standards bodies to produce this common set of interfaces. So I think whilst it's not perfect, I do think it's definitely moving in a better direction than the completely bespoke OSS. Now, as a vendor, being, or any of the vendors I work for, being sticky in OSS is a good thing because you become very difficult to displace. But I think, the service providers have long seen that game coming, and this is why they've returned to the standards bodies to make sure that we comply with something that is more swappable. The application space is probably a little different. Applications are by nature bespoke. So whilst, thinking of RAN again, O2 interface starts to cover some of that. As you move into different types of applications, in newer ones, we're going to have to see standard interfaces again. But that's not going to scale for every single application. I mean, there are thousands, if not millions, of applications. So
Mm.
there's always going to be a slight constraint of volume there. And do we need to standardize everything? My view is it's probably not worth the time. But certainly the bigger applications, then there's a benefit there.
Okay, so so what we're talking about with this arrival at this certain level of maturity for telcos and cloud, I mean, we're talking about great benefits for operators. I mean, so presumably that includes speed. You can do things an awful lot faster than you could before. Business agility, which is kind of the speed contributes to that. Better customer service. Is it about greater a more granular control of assets, or does it really come down to cost?
I, I think it's about all of these things. I mean, if we sort of move up or across the stack, depending on how you look at it, is we assume cloud native is fairly ubiquitous now and deployed. So that provides the foundation for a platform. Next, then has to come connectivity. There's no point having a platform no one can reach. So as we've moved and are progressively moving more into a 5G world, that brings us some other attributes that we can play with as well. So we get obviously better connectivity, better density, and a set of programmable network capabilities as well. So we do have, we have the ability to do network slicing. We have a lot better control over radios, and that gives us other opportunities for how we can fine tune applications on top of just delivering an application into a service or some sort of framework.
Okay, now some commentators, and there's been a lot, I mean, kind of my thinking behind this whole subject for the conference was that for years telcos got slammed for not being more like Google, which always baffled me considering that their missions are so different. But anyway, but I mean, hyperscalers got there much quicker than we did. And I mean, okay, a lot of the technology originated in IT rather than what telco people mean by network. But do you think now that we have started to use CI/CD cycles much better, which were all foreign to telecoms, really, weren't they, at the beginning? Do you think that has played a lot? And I mean, if you talk to people at Orange, they go beyond that and say what you need is GitOps.
That's a very good question. I think they are on. I'll bring it to society role. I think they produced it. They have different roles in society. So whether that's business or whether that's for citizens, is really the goal of telco has been for years to provide extraordinary connectivity with incredible uptime, because it by nature is critical infrastructure. If family member takes a fall, refresh is not the button you want to be going to, right? And I'm not saying that other services are unreliable, but the level of certainty that we've been able to provide as an industry does dictate somewhat our pace. I think actually we're not really in a kind of suck it and see environment, and when we have tried that, it's generally not worked out well. And I think also our customers expect a different type of service from us. They expect services to be relatively long in nature. They're going to not just subscribe to some of these services, but they're going to integrate towards them, and they're expecting a life cycle of multiple years, if not in some cases a decade or more. If Google's not, I don't want to say Google's not in that business, because the Google is in many businesses, and I'll use Google because it's the example you gave, but they are in part, I think, servicing a different set of needs, right? They can add and drop applications. We do see it. How many Google applications have come and gone over the last 10 years? Many. Is it painful? Not as much as it would be if 911 wasn't working or 999 doesn't work. So and they operate in a completely different business model. So I think the telcos going back to your original part of this question, I think the telcos get a bit of an unfair beating on this, actually, because when you take a step back and say, well, in general, what's my level of reliability? That you don't even think about it, as an individual or mostly as a business. It's there, it works, and it supports hospitals, supports the police, supports the army, and very soon it's going to support new types of applications like early responder applications that we're going to see in a much more automated and drone type of fashion. I don't need that to be an alpha when it comes out for the general public. So, but you can do that with an application. So I think telco gets a bit of an unfair rap on that. And
Well, I agree, because it seems to me like comparing, I don't know, apples and zebras or something to me. But so we've agreed now that there's sort of CI/CD cycles were a lot longer, but we got better at that
yeah,
and we adapted it for our needs as telcos. And then it's sort of now we've thrown AI into the mix, and that's kind of jammed up the works a bit again, hasn't it? Because ultimately we think it'll help us do some things better. And obviously we don't want it to do everything, because sometimes it's not really viable to do it that way, but sometimes it will. So now AI, I feel like talking to a lot of people has sort of slowed things down, because for all the reasons you've just stated, telcos have to progress with great caution, and they need to make not only make sure they've got guardrails in place, but that those guardrails are going to do their job. And it's hard to imagine every single set of circumstances that could happen and put something in place to make sure it doesn't go wrong.
I agree. I mean, I think we go back to there's the three pillars, really, isn't there? At this point, there's the native applications platforms, there's the connectivity through 5G, and now what's this third pillar going to bring us through AI? As you point out, I mean, it can't be a free for all, right? We can't just let AI discover things through experiment on a critical infrastructure network. But I don't think that means that we can't use it. So I think we've gone beyond machine learning already. We've used machine learning for years in this industry. I think even back in the day, and I'm going back more years than I want to remember, but 25 years ago at level 3, we already had cron jobs looking for anomalies on optical paths and things like that, and making prediction on that. So machine learning has been used for decades. But I think the ability to glue a lot of different data sets together much quicker, and as you've said, put guardrails around both the answer and also possibly the action that we're going to impose possibly on the network, either predictive or in flight. I think we are going to have to move in that direction, because when we look at things like connected car, it's a very fluid space in terms of connectivity, and it's probably beyond our ability as humans from a knock to sit there and make those types of real-time decisions. So if we want those things to operate efficiently, we're going to have to put a different level of automation in. And I think that intelligence and automation layer, and I use intelligence in quotes, right, because it's only as intelligent as the data we feed it, it is going to be critical, but we need a measured rollout. But it can't go back to telco speed of sort of 40 years ago. So I think we apply all of the things that we've learned. We know we can deploy AI workloads, for example, because they're not truck rolls anymore. They are containers. We can roll those quickly. We can augment those quickly. We know we can test them very well, as you mentioned, the CI/CD pipelines. So we can experiment, but offline through these CI/CD pipelines.
Well, I mean, it seems to me that we're a lot happier to use AI and agentic AI to figure out what's going on, because our visibility across multiple network domains is often pretty rubbish. End-to-end sort of visibility, and it's something, and observability, it's something I think we've struggled with for a long time. But it seems to me we're happier and more comfortable to use agentic AI for monitoring and trying to figure out what's going on, and that might result in predictive actions and stuff. But it seems to me the monitoring is a lot more comfortable to us than the idea of the AI actually running the network, making decisions. I mean, I feel like it's the difference between sticking your toe in and jumping off the high dive board, really. I mean,
I think so. I mean, you mentioned the sort of, across different domains and different infrastructures. I think the one constraint around this is the one, I think it's one of the ones I think we've always had as an industry. I've never met a service provider, even ones where I have been, who wants to freely express how bad their network is at times. They're very happy to express how awesome their network is, but I haven't seen a protocol that wants to express how bad it is that people have voluntarily wanted to subscribe to. That is that likely to change? I think with AI, what you can do is you get better at predicting what's going on outside of your own sphere, and that's probably better than where we are today, where there is a strict boundary where people say, well, all is well. You never really express your poor SLAs in real time, or at least most people don't. So I think we're going to get better at predicting across these domains and across these infrastructures, which will give us a better service. So, and it also keeps, each of the interconnects that we have on our toes, because we, at that point, can be slightly more measured than we were before. So we need to continue to provide what has always been an excellent service from telecoms.
Yeah, I've been talking to some people, and one of the things they've expressed concern about is the need for reversibility. If you implement something and then realize you've goofed, then you need to be able to put it back sharpish to a stable situation. And from a previous conversation I had with you, I think you said, and it really stuck in my mind, that people need to understand just how reliable the infrastructure is, the telecom infrastructure is right now. And it's not something we want to reverse. So we don't want to put it in a situation where it's less reliable than it is now. And we need to experiment to use AI, and yet we can't jeopardize it. And the experiments you do, are you sure they're going to scale? I mean, it seems to me quite a difficult
I,
set of circumstances or
I,
restrictions.
I think it's still difficult. Whilst we have disaggregated to some degree, I think it's quite easy to forget that there are still dependencies here that we can't escape. And as application providers, it's a consumption thing, right? I consume network, I consume GPUs, but actually underneath it all is real hardware. And when we need to make a change to a piece of hardware, be it a firmware upgrade or a microcode upgrade, those things generally go well, but they go well because they're well tested. It's not something we can just say, well, we'll just slam that through and see what happens, because the dependencies are all above in general. And not, we've all seen experiences of microcode updates that are not reversible. They make fundamental changes to the chipsets that we have or code that we have, and they are very difficult to reverse and not backwardly, movable. So that we still have to take great care, I think, with our infrastructure and sort of, not forget why it's reliable. There's a desire to run quickly down the corridor with scissors occasionally, and we shouldn't do that. So, but we are definitely moving faster than we used to, and that's a good thing.
Okay, so Andrew, one of the other drivers that we've kind of hinted at it rather than really touched on it properly, is one of the big drivers for the telco to techco journey was to drive new revenues and to move to platform based models. And lots of people have lots of theories on how AI is going to help with this. And I wonder what yours is. And I'm wondering in particular, like, with AI, and there's much talk about being a distributor of AI and physical AI, and I wonder what you're thinking about these things is.
We talked about in our pre-discussion is I think when one looks at each generational move, and I'll do the connectivity thing first, really, because it's kind of cloud native is such a large move, and it is a game changer. But connectivity on top of it it's almost so incremental sometimes we don't notice. But if we look at what's the difference between a 3G service and a 5G service, for example, they that move profoundly allows us to develop new sets of applications. We look at 4G to 5G, and I'm sure folks from the 5G standards body will throw things at me, but it's a big move, but it hasn't really changed the game for me on my phone or my house or anything else. But the move from 3 to 5 was absolutely phenomenal. And I think, as we move forward from 4 to 6, and we look at what we can enable there with extreme low latency services, and, that a lot of the capabilities, especially around cloud native, are totally mandated. We can develop a completely different set of services, and I'm quite a big fan of where we might go with connected car. I'll confess.
I know you're very keen on
I
connected
don't have an
cars.
electric car. I'm still driving
Let's go with it
a
though.
thing that goes bang in front of me, a nice combustion engine. But in time. So, but there are some. They're not just use cases anymore. It's a whole mobile infrastructure that's sitting out there on these cars that at the moment is very vendor specific. And I think this is where telco can come in with a completely different set of services. And to your point about could we distribute compute across the network again? I think we're probably going to have to. If you look at the specifications for V2X, you're not going to be able to combine the control and management, or even the, let's say, sort of push notification of oncoming ambulance or whatever. You're not really going to be able to run that centrally with the level of reliability that's going to be needed, because it's going to become critical infrastructure again. So I think we will see deeper deployments. My hope would be is that we see them as combined deployments, that, through either a vendor approach or a kind of consolidated vendor and service provider approach, we don't build multiple infrastructures that are essentially all sitting there idle and each one is doing its own job. I think we've done that too many times. And I don't think there's any need to now, because we can share the applications in a common space, and we can deploy them in a common space using cloud native infrastructures. We can slice GPUs. We have technology to do it. We can do, software defined memory. We can get very fine grained with the systems that are out there and make them multi-tenant or, very ships in the night kind of, services for what is going to be mission critical applications again. So I think if you'd asked me this question 2 or 3 years ago, I was probably a lot more reticent on it, but I'm actually quite enthusiastic these days that we now have enough of the building blocks to go and change the game again, and in a meaningful way.
Well, that's one of the things I was thinking about this telco to techco journey in 2016, say, talking about connected cars and autonomous cars it was a bit like a wish list rather than maybe we were anywhere near being able to make it possible, but we feel like we've come further. I think one of the things is that there are too many, all the car manufacturers like to do their own thing, and that doesn't really help with interoperability, whereas actually the very nature of telecommunications is interoperability. I mean, it's almost the definition of it. And also that distributed reach, which is unparalleled. There's nobody else can come anywhere near it.
No, I can't
So it
see.
seems to me the coming together and the maturity of cloud and platforms, these things, it seems we've maybe made more progress than we think if we look back.
I think we might have done. That's kind of why I like to look at it with the sort of two leap thing, 3 to 5, 4 to 6. I mean, what have we done? It's actually, I think it's very noticeable at that point where we've taken the industry, or where the industry's gone in general. And I don't see Jaguar Land Rover going out and putting up a load of cell phone towers. It's back to your point about Google, right? We've each got our own part of this business that we do, diligently and very well, whether that's Google or whether that's Jaguar Land Rover or WindRiver or BT. And I'm not suggesting everybody stays in their own lane, but the overlap, I think, is a lot more fluid than it used to be, and that's going to create a whole new set of applications. And I think we all do work rather well together as an industry, actually.
Yes, well, I mean, interoperability is the foundation of your business, isn't it? I mean,
Standards,
so
yeah.
so
Standards
just
and
to
interop.
kind of summarize, really, it kind of takes us back to where we began with the swappability and the agility that cloud native architecture gives us, and to be able to replace parts of the stack to add capabilities. It's your contention. We've now got the platform in place that is going to enable all the whiz bang stuff we talked about way back then. It's taken us longer and it's been harder to do maybe than we expected. And the interruption of COVID on funding and other things was
Other events.
phenomenal as well, which of course nobody expected.
And I think it puts telco in a slightly different position where we are with the collection of all of these things that we now have to hand. Is we used to operate networks and some services, right? In general, I'm generalising, but And but now we're really going to be looking at operating sort of an intelligent infrastructure, and that's very different than operating a static infrastructure or a semi-static infrastructure. And I don't mean by that mobility. I just mean the fluidity of the types of services, the types of networks that we can offer. I think it's going to be potentially quite a different game. Do we know what it is as an industry yet? I'll confess, I don't. I mean, part of that for me is the fun of the journey. Is that we're going to discover this by experimentation, by doing, by architecture. But I do think we have a whole raft of tools that we didn't have 10 years ago. And what I think we always find with this industry is, given the tools, people create extraordinary applications and services. So I think that's where we're going to find ourselves in the next 1 to 5 years.
Andrew McLachlan of WindRiver, thank you very much.